Hey sis, and welcome to a special edition of the Sisters Podcast. We're your host. I'm Lois.
I'm Bree.
And today we are filming at Polishing the Pulpit with two very special guests. Introduce yourselves, ladies.
Hi, I'm Jeannie Gilpin. I'm a retired teacher. I live in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. I have grown kids and 6 grandchildren.
Awesome. Laura?
My name is Laura Boyd, and I live in Gadsden, Alabama. I'm married to a preacher and to an elder, and they're both the same man. And I have 4 grown married children and 10 biological grandchildren and 1 bonus named Lois.
Oh, what a coincidence. Today we are talking about parenting, which is kind of ironic because I call Jenny my adopted mom, and this is Nana over here, of course, as she already introduced herself. So I'm so thankful to be able to have this experience with them, and Bree is along for the ride, of course, so we're going to be laughing this whole time. It's just kind of how we roll. We were told to be quiet during setup, and as you can imagine, it ended with us busting out in laughter, well, in the middle of it, so no silence was had. But, okay, ready to get going, ladies? First off, obviously, Bree and I are not married, and we don't have any kids yet. So what advice do you have for us starting out? You gonna start, Nana?
I can. I'd like to read 2 Timothy 1, verse 5, where it says, Paul's telling Timothy, I recall your sincere faith that first lived in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and now I am convinced is in you also. And that gives me the idea that the primary thing you need to do first is be sure that you have your faith dwelling in you. That it's your faith, not your parents, not your grandparents, but you're sure, you're strong, you're determined in your own faith.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
And if you decide at that point that we're going to attend all the services of the church, we're going to go to Vacation Bible School, we're going to attend all the gospel meetings, and if you just decide that's going to be the center of your home, then when things come up, and they will, people will try to pull you away, and we're having this on Sunday morning, we're doing this on Wednesday night, there's this ball game. Then you will know, you'll just say to yourself, well, we've already made that decision. We already know where we're going to be. And your kids will grow up knowing that that's the priority.
Going off of that, your son was really good at baseball, correct?
Yeah. He set 7 high school baseball records in our state. So he was really good, and you know what challenges we had there. Well, there were district and state games, 5 regular season games that were on Wednesday night. So, it's not fun to pull the pitcher off the mound at 6:45. But we had already decided long time before he was born where we were going to be. And so it wasn't, the coach didn't like it, but he was worldly. The, other people didn't like it, but, today I don't remember what happened about that ball game. I don't remember what the score, the record was, but I do remember how he grew up, and he's a faithful Christian today. So that's what's important.
Exactly.
I'm really glad we did that.
That makes me recall also, I had 4 brothers, and Daddy was a preacher, but he also loved sports, so he coached on little leagues and things like that. And there were many Wednesday nights when we were in the station wagon and the guys were in the back changing clothes on the way to Bible study, and it was, don't let her look, Mama.
I always brought my bag. One of my teammates was also a Christian, so her dad would come pick us up from practice on Wednesday night, 6:45 every time, and I would bring my bag and throw it underneath one of the tables in the foyer, and we did the same thing, run to the bathroom and change, and run into Bible class. So something about baseball and softball, I guess those are the sports to have on Wednesday night.
Yeah. Football's usually not on Wednesday nights.
That's true.
That's
true.
So there's two good tips.
Okay. What about transitioning once you do have kids between you and your husband to now having a third wheel?
Big changes.
Yeah.
Well, one of the biggies going to be the time that the two of you get to spend together, what we call quality time as a couple. It's going to be a lot non-existent, isn't it, Jeannie?
It's busy.
Unless you absolutely intentionally plan it.
Yeah.
And you should.
Yeah.
And then your parents are used to you being their child, and they have to see you in another role. And if they don't easily do that, you may have to put some boundaries down. And it's okay to say, we don't want company here and there. And if they're what they ought to be, they'll understand because they'll remember. Yeah. Because things have changed now, and you're a family. You have a child, so you may have to just draw some lines, and sometimes when it might be, don't hold it up inside of you until you blow. Just as you go along, teach each other this is how things are going to change now that we have a child.
And you and your husband should have discussed this before the child gets there.
Yeah.
So that he can, because a lot of times it may be his mother that's the problem, and it comes across better if it comes from him.
The in-laws.
Because otherwise you're just that girl, that in-law girl.
Yeah.
But if he needs to back you up. He needs to back you up.
Yeah.
And he can do it lovingly to his mother. But I have a whole list right here of some things that are going to change. Like you're not going to sleep.
Oh, really?
No.
Decades.
Your diet, I'm sorry, Bree, might be a French fry,
Bree would
You're
not
going to be
survive.
tired and overwhelmed, pretty much all the time. If this is your first one, you may not have had any experience, but I know that you have had a lot of experience with children.
Yes, ma'am.
You're good with kids. Sometimes if you got more than one, it seems like somebody's sick all the time. Don't you think so, Jeannie?
Oh, yeah. Somebody's always going to the doctor.
And,
Throw the other one in the car.
yeah. And the biggie is you will not go to the bathroom by yourself until they start school.
Little fingers under the doorway.
Even if I even had little voices coming under the door going, "Mama, are you in there?"
See, I already experienced this, but I get to go home at the end of the day.
Yes.
So I don't get to go home at the end of the day. So we'll see what happens.
Nor do you get to go to bed at night.
Okay. Yeah, we have so much to look forward to.
But they are so worth it.
Yeah, they are
Yeah,
worth it.
they're so worth it.
Actually, I really love my grandchildren. They're precious and perfect. And if I had known that, I would have had them first
Well,
instead of my kids.
and that's the reason for not killing your kids.
That's correct. That's why you let your kids live
Yeah.
for the grandchildren.
For the
And I
grandchildren.
think that's focusing on that point. You get to spoil your grandkids a lot more than you spoil your kids. You spoil
Yes.
your kids. So how do you go from keeping a spoiled brat, pretty much? I see a lot of parents with bratty children. And I'm not a parent, obviously, so I'm not saying this and you're wrong. But I'm saying, what would you say to us to keep humble and patient and kind kids?
Well, kids are going to do what you allow them to get away with.
Exactly.
That doesn't mean they're bad.
Mm-hmm.
It just means they need to be trained.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a middle school teacher for most of my career. And whatever's out in society, I saw it walk through the school doors.
Mm-hmm.
Everything.
Oh.
Whatever the issue is. And we have gone from, when I started teaching in 1984, from the teacher was the authority, the principal, it's what the bus driver said. Now, those people are being accused of being the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's totally flip-flopped. And I'm retired now because I would probably be in jail in some of the situations that I've seen. I would have fixed the problem, but that's not the way they want the problem fixed. The child is in charge. So, if you think about it, back in history, Charles Darwin said that we came from animals. Then a few years later, Sigmund Freud said that we should be allowed to act like the animals that we are. And then Benjamin Spock, more in the modern time, came along and said that we shouldn't be punished for acting like the animals that we are. And thus, we have raised the most violent generation in our history. And it's because we have let the children start running the show. And so when you have children, that's the first lesson. Every day, over and over, that I'm in charge. No, I'm in charge. And so I had to sit on him. And everything, it wasn't about the toy or what he broke, or it wasn't about that. It was, come here, do what I said do. No, I said do that. And it was always obeying. The other one was scared of me the way he should have been. He didn't have as many spankings, but that one, he was there to say, I'm in charge of all this show. Now, what happens is a lot of parents just say, isn't that cute?
Mm-hmm.
Or
He'll grow out
of
of
it.
It's just a phase. The terrible twos. There's no such thing as a terrible twos.
Yeah.
And it's not the child's fault. And the longer you let it go, the worse it is. And I always looked at my children like, I love you too much to allow you to act like this. Because I know how the world works and you don't. So,
that makes me think about when God tells us in Hebrews 12:11 that no chastening for the present seems joyous, but grievous, but it yields peaceable fruit of righteousness to those which are exercised thereby. And of course, we know Proverbs 13:24 and 23:13 and 19:18. They have foolishness bound up in their heart. And he says, and don't not spank them because they're going to cry. Now, I know that with our four, they were like most kids. They thought if they cried loud enough and hard enough that we wouldn't spank them. But that's not true, because I knew as soon as you stop spanking them, they're through crying. But I will tell you this little funny that happened with our two youngest. And we won't call names, but if you know our children, they had done something and they were little. They were like, I don't even know if the littlest one was even in school yet. She was probably maybe first grade. So this would have been about first and third grade. And we had been somewhere, and Brooks told him, he said, when we get home, you're getting spanking. I don't recall what they'd done, but it's one of those, we'll spank you when we get home, because we were headed home. Well, by the time we got home 5 minutes later, we both had forgotten, and they took off up to their room, just lickety-split, and we were like, oh, well. And in a little bit, here they come back downstairs, and they were just giggling. It's two girls giggling, and their little behinds, I promise you, were that big. They had put on every pair of pants they owned. They had stuffed toilet paper all in their britches, and Brooks was like, what do y'all think you're doing? And they said, we're ready for a spanking, Daddy.
Well, and that's another thing, so many, I hear young parents today, and they're probably listening to this thinking, oh, there's those two old grandmas and all they're going to talk about is spanking. Discipline is not about just spanking.
Just spanking, no.
Discipline, the military is discipline. Anything that runs efficiently has discipline. It doesn't mean corporal punishment all the time. But for me, it was whatever the child required. My first one, I could tell him what to do with my voice, and he had very few times that I had to go beyond that. There are things you can take away, and there are rewards that you can give, and there are times and tablet time and, go somewhere. There are many things that you can employ, whatever works for you. But the last resort, God has given us that. Train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Proverbs 6:22. That's not take them to church and they'll never leave church. That's a generalization. If you train that child in the way that he should go, not in the way he wants to go, that's a generalization. I've heard that taught incorrectly for years and years, that he will not depart from that, the training that you've given him. And so did I want to just say, oh, I've had this stubborn, willful child, and this is just who he is, and, we're just all going to have to live with it? No. And today he is a kind, mild-mannered people person. And when I tell stories about him, the second one, they got all the spankings. People say, don't you mean the other one? And I know which one I'm talking about. I was there. And another thing I didn't do is I did not wait for Eddie to come home and handle all the problems of the day. You have two parents preferably for a reason. And I was there. I handled it. The idea was, I'm the authority. I'm handling this. You got out of line, here's your punishment. And we backed each other up too. We didn't say, I didn't say, oh, well, I know she does that, she said that, but you don't have to do that, So it was consistent, and it was, every time it was the same. And I tried to look at each individual situation and give the punishment appropriately. Did I make mistakes? A million of them. And you will too. And I would go back and fix all of them. But one thing was crystal clear. And if you call up my children today and ask them, one thing was crystal clear. They were 100% sure that we were in charge, and they were not. And we went out in public, and you could tell who was in charge. If we went to church, you could tell who was in charge. And at school, you could tell who was in charge. And that's very, very, very important to establish that early and often.
John, I don't know if you know who John Roseman is. He's a child psychiatrist. He's he's published a lot in syndicated newspapers, and he's kind of like James Dobson. I mean, they're not members of the church, but have very good advice, logical advice for discipline and bringing up your children. And he says by the time a child is 3, he knows whether he's got to listen to you or whether you're going to listen to him. That's at 3 years old.
Wow.
And going along with what you were talking about, just to kind of put it in a nutshell, if you want your discipline to be effective, number one, it has to be consistent. You can't threaten to spank them one time and not do it and then spank them the next time, or whatever you're doing, whatever method. It's got to be administered in a timely fashion, like Jeannie just said, not wait till your daddy gets home, but come here right now. I've left the store. I've just left my buggy and we've left, because if we can't behave, we're leaving. you have to produce the desired action. And that's where the different forms of discipline come in. One thing might work on one child that totally doesn't work on the other one. So if what you're doing is not bringing about the type of behavior that you want, then you've got to find something different and a different type, and also be age appropriate. And this is the one that just blows my mind when I see parents pull their 2 or 3 year old over and they're like, now honey, we can't act like this, and they go into a 5 or 10 minute dialogue, discussion with them, and you can see the child rolling their eyes, and they're not listening. Children at that age, discussion is not going to get it. So we have to be age appropriate.
Do you have something on that?
I was going to say, so have we convinced y'all not to have children?
That's probably what it sounds like. Well,
what helps is marry someone who has the same values and ideas that you do about, and y'all talk about this before you get married. Do we want children, and how are we going to raise them? Because if you wait till they're there and he's a permissive parent and you're not, that's going to cause trouble in your marriage.
Yeah. And we did not have that conversation. Fortunately, we agreed 100% with everything, but I just did things like this. They never called me because they forgot their homework at home, because they knew I wouldn't bring it. I let them suffer consequences of things. Some parents you took a check mark away from them, or they can't go on the field trip. I always said, you're right, you can't go on the field trip. That's what she said. And, you take up for them. My oldest one got a speeding ticket when he was a senior. He kept getting up later and later and later and driving to school faster. So he took a cutoff road where the speed limit is 25 and he was going 40. And so they had to come back home because now they're late for high school and get a note. And so he came back in and I said, what are you doing? And the younger one said, he got a ticket. And I said, what? So I got the brief notes and I said, you come straight home. We'll deal with this afternoon. Where was it? And he told me. I wrote him a note and off they went. So I was ready to go to school too. So I went to where he said, and there he was. He was still sitting there.
The cop?
The cop. Okay. And so I got out, I pulled out behind him, and I bet he was looking in his mirror like, okay, who's this? And I got out, and he got out of the car, and I said, did you just stop a teenager and describe the truck and everything? And he said, yes, ma'am, I did. And I bet he thought, oh, here she comes. Gonna come get the ticket for a little baby torn up. He said, yeah, I did. And I said, well, I want to know a couple of things. Was he respectful? He said, oh, yes, ma'am. He said, yes, sir. No, sir. Gave up the paperwork. Said the one in the other side of the truck, he was grinning the whole time. Yeah, that was the little brother.
Sibling.
Because it wasn't his ticket.
Wasn't his ticket. But I said, well, I just want to tell you, I want to thank you for doing your job. And you might have just slowed him down and saved him from an accident. And that's all I wanted to say. I just wanted to tell you, thank you for doing your job. And I got in the car and left. And I bet later he was telling that down at the donut shop. And they were like, no, I'm not believing this. That's what I mean. And they always knew that we were going to defend the law, the rule, the teacher, the principal. And kids need to know that. If they can whine and tell the story, just tweak it just a little bit so it looks good on them, they will. Doesn't mean they're bad people. Just means, I'm caught and I'd really like to get out of this looking pretty good and not being punished for it. And ours always knew that, if we were going to take up for you, you better have hard, fast evidence to the contrary, because even when you get a speeding ticket, and he had to pay the dip class, and he had to pay for the attorney that went to court, and he had to pay the court cost with his part-time pay. So
that I agree. I think it's one of the, if not the most important, one of the most important things is let them suffer the consequences of their bad decisions. Don't rescue them.
Yes.
I had a grandmother who was raising her granddaughter, and she was already in her 20s by this time. And she had become an alcoholic, and they came and wanted some counseling, and the grandmother told me that the first time that the granddaughter got drunk and got picked up and put in jail, she went and bailed her out. And I looked at her and I said, and there was your mistake. And she says, what? And I said, you should have let her sit there overnight. Oh, I could not do that to my granddaughter. And I said, everything she's done in the last however many years it had been, I said, you have gone and bailed her out, and she continues to make the same mistakes over and over.
Because she knows she's got a safety net.
Make them suffer their consequences. And I'd say number 2, right up there with it, is give them responsibility while they're at home that they have to do. Don't do everything for them. You know, don't make their beds and pick up their clothes or their toys. And they need to have chores and things that they do that they don't get paid for.
And the hardest job for a mother is to accept that she has done a great job.
Yeah.
Because they leave and they're independent and they don't need to run home all the time. And they're just happier that way because you've taught them the way the world works. And they're happier adults when they know what the rules are. I just always wanted mine to know this is the way the world works. This is the way you talk to adults. This is what you don't do and you do. And there's all of that for 18 years and beyond.
I'm sure you taught yours to say yes, ma'am, and no, sir.
When they were about 3.
Right. As soon as they started to talk. And I actually would have adults say, oh, they don't have to say that to me. And I'd go, oh,
But
yes,
they have
they
to
do.
say it to me.
No, I'd tell them, I'd say, yes, they do.
I taught school. And in the first week, I knew the ones that said yes, ma'am, to their parents at home and the ones that didn't. But even the ones that didn't said yes, ma'am, to me.
To you.
During the first week, that's how, and it's just respectful.
It is.
It doesn't mean that.
And it helps with that idea of this person's in charge of
I'm
me.
in charge,
That's
correct.
Right.
Yeah, and I acted like I was in charge. I didn't act like I was one of their friends, and neither did I do that to my children. They had enough friends. I'm not
When they
trying
get to be in their 20s, they
Yeah.
can be your friend.
Yeah, when they're married and
When they're married and start giving you
they have their
grandchildren.
own house payment.
I think from Bree and I's point of view, we've talked about this before. We are so thankful for our parents, for when they said no, for when they said yes, and for the ways that they raised us. And when you're kids, you don't think about it as much. You're like, oh, I can't go to this. Like all my friends are going. But now I'm like, I'm so thankful that I couldn't go to that because we have peer pressure from these friend groups and everything. And when you're in it, it's so much harder to see what the consequences are going to be later.
Right.
And so when that foundation was set, like we said, we began with of saying like, this is what's going to happen. This is what's going to happen. And when we're in it, it might not always feel the best, but like y'all have already been there, y'all know, and we can see it now. Okay, they were right. As much as I hate to admit it,
Yeah.
You agree, Bree?
Yeah, it was like my mom one time, or she's always been like this. I just how she has parented me, both my parents, but I specifically think of my mom in a specific situation when there would be, anytime there's people, like if we're at a restaurant or we were at, I think, a ball game or something, and someone was just yelling cuss words, just like left and right. And mom will stand up and say, hey, there's kids here. You don't need to be using that language. And she consistently stands up. And so does my dad. They consistently stand up for things like that. And so just seeing not just how they're parenting me, but just seeing their influence and just watching them from when I was a young age. Because I think even when you're a young age, like when you're 2 and 3, I remember things that they did. So not even just the parenting things, but just watching them and their life as a Christian.
When you're disciplined, you are under control. That's just another word. You're under control. And whether it's a dog, I took my dog to obedience training and went through all of that. And I could say sit and stay and come and go and,
And they mind so much better than children.
Yeah. And we could take him anywhere or have company over and tell him to sit down, and he would. It's just nice to be around people who are disciplined. And if you have children, I could take my 2 boys anywhere. We were happy. We could go to McDonald's during the day and let them play in the playground after we ate our lunch. Once we sat there and we would just talk. One was 3 and one was 5, 2 and 5 maybe. And we were sitting there, and this couple, probably about my age now, somewhere in their 60s, came over after and said, listen, I want to tell you, you've got 2 of the most well-behaved children I've ever seen, and I want to tell you the truth. When we saw you coming with those 2 little boys in their tray and going to sit over here by us, I said to her, you need to eat up. We got to get out of here. And he said, but that's not what it was. I watched and I was thinking, and we thanked them. And I think the youngest one said, we's good boys, ain't we, Mama? And yeah, you are. Because the training was done at home, and you can take them anywhere. You can take them to church. You can take them to a wedding, and they're not the ones that everybody's talking about because they're out of control.
Well, the way you allow your children to act at home is how they're going to act in public.
Right.
They don't flip over and become an angel. You know, if you let them run to the house and jump on the furniture and talk back and be loud, they're going to do that if you go to anybody else's house, if you go to a restaurant. And I remember times too that people complimented us in restaurants because it's so unusual even then to see a family with children and have the children actually sit at the table throughout the whole meal and not be running, not be yelling, not be throwing fits. Because, I mean, you go now and I have said many times, we can go eat, we can go, I hate to bring this up, but go to services somewhere else or to singing anywhere, and the people with the worst kids are going to come and sit by us or be in front of us or behind us, it seems like. And it's like nobody makes their children behave anymore. It's like if they're
crying instead of the kids crying.
Well, if my child wants to run down the pew during worship and laugh and talk and run back and forth, they just and they're like they're oblivious. You know,
somebody look it up. The verse that says, "Chasten thy son while there is hope."
Oh, I think that was one of them.
That verse tells us that there will come
Proverbs 19:18. Let not thy soul spare for his crying.
That tells me a couple of things. That sometimes discipline involves crying, not on the part of you, but on the part of the child. And chasten thy son while there is hope. That says to me that there will come a time when there's no more hope. Like a green tree versus a mature tree. It can't be bent anymore. And there'll come a time when your words are ineffective, they're grown, they're out of control, and you can't do anything about it. And there's also verses about is a grief to his mother.
Right.
A child left to himself. Brings grief to his mother. And it's just so many warnings in the Bible. And all it is, it's not about beat your kids. It's about discipline, get them under control. And every child is different.
If you think about it too, to a small child, having boundaries and regulations and rules actually gives them a feeling of security. That child thinks Mama knows what Mama says. I can play right up to that line right there, but I can't go past that line because something bad might happen. So as long as I'm right here, I can play and be happy. The child who doesn't know that line is a boundary, you know, he's like, I don't know. Can I go? But can I not? You know, that a child is thinking, I don't know what I can do. I don't know where I'm safe.
Getting a child in trouble for something they didn't even know they couldn't do.
Right.
Another thing too.
Well, but you know, it's a safety issue. That's one reason I despise the counting. I'm going to count to 3.
Yeah, I'm not counting.
I despise that because it's not safe. If you are always counting to your child, what your child is thinking is, she said 1, but I don't have to do it till we get to 3. So they keep doing what they're doing. Well, let's imagine that you're coming out of a store and your 4-year-old takes off toward the parking lot and you say, stop, because here's a car coming. And he's waiting for you to count to 3. And he may look behind him and be laughing, you know, Mom, I don't have to stop till she says 3. And in the meantime, here comes this car. So in my mind, it's a safety issue too. You're teaching them to delay obedience, and it can be dangerous. It can be dangerous.
Teach them to obey, and everything else will be
easier.
Easy.
So let me ask, for a parent who's listening to this who already has let their child go on for too long, say they're 5 or 10, once you get into the teenage years, whatever, what can you do to, okay, well, I haven't done what I should do now. Is there have they lost all hope? What age do they hit that? What are they doing? They're still young.
They haven't lost all hope because they're still under their care.
Yes.
But it's going to be so much harder to do. They're going to have to take drastic measures
So
to
you want to give
get
some
that,
examples?
to rein that back in. Well, you know, let's say that someone talks back to you.
Yes, ma'am.
So you're going to have to over and over dish out punishment and keep saying, you're not going to say that to me. And it's hard to, you know, they get a certain age and the spanking isn't I don't know, appropriate or.
It doesn't hurt as bad as taking away their phone.
No, and it's maybe belittling at that point, you know. But see, I always just wanted to do it when they were younger. You can ask my younger child who got spanked pretty much every day because it was defy, over and over. And you know, if you ask that son of mine who got every day. It was a war with him for about 3 years. He doesn't remember. I've asked him before, do you remember all this spankings? And he doesn't remember. Because I did it so early. I was training him up in the way that he should go, not in the way he wants to go. And the other one doesn't remember either. Of course, he didn't get very many, but some people learn the first time, you know. But early and often. And it's just whatever the child requires. But he's going to be under control. It's really
So we want to
important.
bump them on into college.
Yeah.
Let's bump them on into college.
Horse of a different color.
Well, and we kind of touched on that a while ago. If we've allowed them to accept their own consequences of bad choices, it will help them so much. If they know Mama's not bringing their homework, they better take it with them. When they get in college, it'll help them remember to get their books before they leave the room. You know what I'm saying? They've already been trained to be sure, do I have this, and this? You know, nobody's bringing it to me when you get in college.
Yeah.
And so if Mama didn't bring it to them in high school, then they already know that lesson. So accepting consequences in college. And then I had told Jeannie when she and I were talking about it, I said, one thing that I liked for my children to do once they were in college was to bring their friends home with them occasionally. And I didn't want them every weekend. But, you know, if they wanted to bring them home every now and again, that was good because I want to see who they're hanging out with. You know, I want to see what kind of things they talk about and how their friends are talking and dressing and things they like to do. And also, I was involved with them when they asked me to be. I remember one of them was in a play. She was at Faulkner, and they were doing something it's where they do the shows and stuff. I forget what they called it down there. But anyway, she volunteered her mother to make like a dozen costumes because I can sew. And I'm like, are you kidding me? And so what I actually did was I cut them out, but I sent them back with her except for hers. I did make hers. And I said, you tell them they're cut out according to their sizes and somebody else is going to need to sew these because I was working full time. I don't have time to make, 12,
She wanted you
12,
involved.
12 new, what would it have been? The old English type, with the armband things and all that, the vest. And yeah.
Oh.
We're not talking throw over your head tunic here. So, but I was glad that she felt like she could say, hey, my mom will do that.
Even though you didn't?
Well,
You let her down.
I did hers. And I told her, I said, I can cut them out, but I don't have time to sew them all. And she was okay with
Wanted
that.
you involved.
Yeah.
Hey, one thing I hear is when kids go off to college, it's acceptable to the parents that church attendance might be a little iffy. And well, you know how they are, they're kids and they're having fun and I really can't be there and it's their decision and all kinds of silly things. So one of ours wanted to go to college not far from home, and we looked around and there wasn't a good place for them to attend church. So we said, you can't go to that school. Look again. And so they ended up choosing their college. They both went to the same place. And so there were 3 choices of good churches around there, and they got to choose from those 3. And then we went to church. When we took them down there, took their stuff, dumped it out on the sidewalk, went to church with them, and we said to someone, where's the leadership here today? And they'd say, them. So we had a little meeting in the aisle, and we said something like, hi, this is so-and-so. He's a song leader. He can teach class. He can lead prayer. He can do this. He's creative. He's an athlete. And he is expected by us and by God to be here every time the door's open. And it's your responsibility to see that he is. Go get him if he misses. And if you can't get him to come back, here's my card. I guarantee you I can get him back. And so our boys heard that. So the expectation of attending faithfully did not stop just because they moved their stuff to a different place.
I wish more people would do that.
We're concerned about his spiritual life, his eternal life, his
more than his academic
More than his academics.
Yes.
You're
Yes.
being a success, Glenn says, is living your life and going to heaven, not going to Harvard.
Yes.
Yeah.
But something that hurts me so much, I'm glad you brought this up, is we see so often, and I've talked about this on the podcast before, you'll see these kids will start coming and then slowly they stop. They'll be there Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday, and then, maybe Sunday morning, not Sunday night. And then Wednesday they'll be there. And then before long, they're not there at all. And then you'll randomly see them, their parents come to visit town. So then they'll be back with their parents, but where are they the rest of the time, And I think college is such a hard time because their friends are not in the church. Because they join the band, they join whatever club they're in, all this stuff. And then they look to them for, okay, well, this person's doing this.
Yeah.
Your social life actually ramps up, because there's the social clubs and there's the
freedom.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
freedom now to stay out a little later and to go where you want to go eat and all that stuff. So, and I think every parent, if you're wondering about your child, you need to be asking them, where'd you worship this morning? What do you think about that congregation, or who are your friends? Check up on them. Let them know that you're still going to be there. And we've told our children, even after they were grown and married, we stay out of your business unless we think it affects your soul, and then you're going to hear from us.
Exactly.
And you should be more concerned about your kid's soul than them being your best friend and them liking you.
Right.
No, ours knew that was the number one
Right.
thing. I'll take your B's and an occasional C. But that is one thing that's not going to. And for one of ours, they were going to major in one thing, and then they went to school, and the influence of that congregation and the college minister had him change his major, and he went from there to Memphis to be a preacher. So it was after he got to college, and they brought out all those good things in him that he could
What
do.
you said about too the eldership.
Yeah.
I think that is such a big deal. If you were taking your kid to school somewhere, a church with elders,
Yeah.
because those elders are going to be looking after their soul when they aren't there. And if it's a smaller congregation without elders, they're not going to have that shepherd.
I mean, I worked on that program for 18 years, night and day. And I'm dropping off my prized possession. I'm not going to leave it to chance as much as I can. I know I can't be there. I know he probably did some things that he shouldn't have, that he regrets, that I don't know about. I don't know. I can't be there all the time. And I prayed a lot. And but I'm dropping off my prized possession. I'm not leaving it to chance. And you're still under my care. You're still getting money from my bank account. So I still can control you. I don't understand the parents that just legitimately, easily just give up the power that they have when they can influence their child for good. Also on the people they date and the girls they bring home, we didn't hold back from, well, son, she's must not be a Christian. She's not dressed like one. You still can, you still do have the power if you will use it. But yes, as long as you're giving them money, that's the big, and you bought their car. I bought the car. I was providing everything in his life. I still had the power, and I was going to use it.
After our three daughters had their children, I told them one day, I got them together and I said, only now can you understand how much I love you. You don't know, your children don't understand a mother's love until they are a mother. And I wanted them to know that because of any of the hard times we might have gone through, that now you've got this precious little soul of your own, and I can tell they love those children. They love them. And I'm like, you know how I feel. Now you know how I feel.
And here's the thing, if you spoil your children, you will be raising your grandchildren. But if you raise your children to be independent, successful,
you can spoil your grandchildren.
You can spoil your grandchildren.
That's right.
And that's the preferable way, because that's a lot of fun.
And how many grandparents do we know that are raising their grandchildren?
Yes, and that's what made me think of that, because there's more and more grandparents are coming to the parent-teacher meetings at school because they're raising their grandchildren because mom and dad just can't get it together. And it's, like I said, every issue that's out in society, it walks in the school door.
And let's just be honest, Jeannie. I don't have the energy to raise kids right now. I mean,
do it right.
Yeah.
That's why God gave kids to
When
the young
you're young,
people.
yeah.
That's right. It takes a lot of energy and time. And I have 6 grandchildren between 7 and 13. And they're all precious, and they never do anything wrong, and they're perfect. But I can do that because I'm Gemma.
Yeah.
And then they go home. to the rules
Have you noticed that your grandchildren behave better when mom and daddy aren't there?
when they're not there. Yes.
Isn't that funny?
Yes.
You let mom and daddy walk in the door and all of a sudden they start whining or crying or whatever. But the whole time they've been gone, they've been perfect.
Well, and I always decided too that I wasn't going to make an enemy. So my daughter-in-law, she has a rule that they can't do.
Right.
It's just the rule.
You do have to go by what the parents say.
Yeah, because I wanted that kind of respect when I was the mother. And I remember when I didn't get that respect and I didn't like it.
But I did appreciate that you know, when the parents would say, now, Papa and Nana can spank you. And they'd be like, they would never do that. But then we're telling you, if you need it, they can spank you too.
Now, mine may have told them that, but Pop and Gemma do not spank.
No, we don't.
No. I have taken one by the hand one time and found the daddy,
Yes.
but Gemma's not going to spank.
My papa spanked 2 of my cousins, or one of my siblings and one of my other cousins. That's it. Out of, I think there's 14 of us.
It must have been really bad.
So, but no, actually, I think I did get spanked. Now that I'm thinking about
I can't imagine, Lois.
I can't see it.
I went outside when I wasn't supposed to.
He mistook you for a different child.
I think that's what
Well,
it is.
here's the thing. My papa, he died when I was 7, but he was my best friend growing up, and now my dad, so it's just the friends of the family. But anyway, so he had a farm and a garden, and if y'all know me, y'all know I love to be outside, and I wanted to be out there with him. He was working, so I went out, but it was for my safety. He was on the tractor or
It
something.
usually is.
So I got spanked for going out when I wasn't
Yes.
supposed to. But besides that, only 2 of us ever got spanked. It was me and one of my cousins.
If the parents are anywhere around, we would not spank ours at all. And I don't recall ever spanking any of the grandchildren, but I do know that one time Brooks gave one swat to one of them, and it was because I had gone in the house to put on my swim clothes, and he had gone on and taken 3 of them. And they were little. They're just little, you know, like preschool, kindergarten, and underage. And he had told one in particular, do not go over by the ladder until everybody gets their life jackets on. You know, it's just a 48-inch pool, but they're not 48 inches tall. And as he turned his back to help the smallest one put on the life jacket and turned around, one of them's already over there on the ladder.
Scary.
And I mean, just out of reflex, he, just one pop on the bottom, and he was like, I told you. And it's because it scared him, and it was a safety issue,
Yes,
and it was a willful disobedience,
Yes.
But spanking, if the parents will do it like they should, then grandma and grandpa should.
It's easy. Yeah, if they're disciplined all the way, and all 6 of mine have been. And it is such a joy to have them because I can say, they ask you, you can, do things, and you do as much as you possibly can with what they want to do. But sometimes you have to say no, and that's the end of it, because they've been disciplined, and it's wonderful to have them. And there's no, sometimes there's an argument, and I said, hey, knock it off. Yeah. And they do. And when it's time to go to bed, they go to bed. When it's time to get a bath, they get a bath, and it's wonderful. Else I wouldn't want them to come because it'd just be stressful.
Well, I hate to cut you all off, but we're going to have to stop there. We might have to do a part 2 for all the grandparent stories.
Do a grandma issue, huh?
Yes. But thank you, Jenny and Laura, for coming.
Oh, thank you for having us.
We have
This is
loved this. I
fun.
feel like I'm just sitting here like, I could listen to y'all talk all day.
Absorbing
And Bree just
information.
feels like an ornament, doesn't she?
Just taking in all the information.
Well, thank you for listening, and be sure to look us up. Our Instagram is sisters.podcast, and a special shout out to Polishing the Pulpit. Thank you for letting us film here. We have loved this so much, and if you have never been to a Polishing the Pulpit, I think all 4 of us cannot recommend it enough. This has just been such an uplifting week, and we have loved it so much. So we'll talk to y'all later. Bye.